Hello, today is Tuesday, July 30th, 2019. This is the standard Kubernetes SIG cluster lifecycle main meeting. We have a fairly light agenda, so if you have details and want to add them to the meeting notes, that would be helpful. I will share my screen. Hopefully folks can see my screen. Yes, no, maybe so.
Looks good.
Great. One of the things, because we have such a light agenda, maybe I'll start off with this, is that we have an issue to retire dined. I filed the issue. I have to follow up with it. So I'll follow up and maybe report back to the SIG in the meeting notes on the current state. But the issue's been filed. It's just waiting for Ivan to give the last thumbs up, and the dined repository will be retired for the SIG in favor of kind. The next one is removing the /cluster directory. I don't know if anyone's had the time to really work on this at all.
I'm working on it as I get some time. So been talking with Maria and Tala, but a little bit of mixing steps 1 and 2 from the previous comment on themes. So one of them is just writing everything that the cluster directory is supposed to be able to provide, all the features that the cluster directory is supposed to be able to provide, and the other one is to delineate the test workflow so that we can replicate it with cluster API or something else. So work in progress.
It might be possible too to do an audit of the current running jobs and move those jobs over. Because you're looking at some of this here too, anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. So also taking it up on that side, but yeah, still a work in progress.
Okay. Chuck, you're next on the list.
Hooray. Let's see, Go Releaser. Yes, Go Releaser is a release tool for SIG cluster lifecycle projects. Hold on one second. Sorry, yes, Go Releaser for releasing binaries, specifically for cluster API projects and potentially other SIG cluster lifecycle projects if people are interested. I found it to be a really good tool for auto-generating release notes and building binaries cross-platform. You can take a look at that link, and you can see it's being used in CapD right now. It integrates really well with GitHub Actions, so you can automatically print out a change log and get all your binaries uploaded in a nice looking release. And all you have to do is tag the repo with an annotated tag and push that, which is also good practice for Go modules. Overall, I had a really good experience with it, and I think it would be useful to use across the board. And by we, I mean I rewrote something like this for Kappa, but I think you could entirely replace it with Go Releaser. I would not recommend using Go Releaser for images, however, because it gets really complicated with permissions. I would recommend using the image promoter through the K8s org infrastructure stuff. So just any thoughts on that?
I really like Go Releaser. One of the things that might be beneficial, I think, we don't actually do this as part of our, you can have templates on your, when you do on your GitHub commit messages, because Go Releaser doesn't really respect the issue template stuff. It might be beneficial to have a standard template for your commit messages, because that would then publish the information a little bit cleaner for Go Releaser. So that way you'd have a Go Releaser page that has like a unified feel or format for what are the release notes.
So I will say we definitely don't really have that right now with any of the projects. We've got, for Kappa, we have release notes that we generate by hand by looking at commit messages. At least what Go Releaser will do for you is pull in all the commits that are in your release, and then it will let you go in and edit the release through the GitHub UI. So if you don't like the way Go Releaser looks, you can absolutely modify it.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have a list of all the commits as well. And there's a way to like exclude the merge commits, so you can just get the real commits. So I was thinking about using that for cluster API for Bootstrap provider KubeADM, and was asked to bring it up at this meeting to see if there was any interest in sort of standardizing on that tool as a binary releaser.
I don't know whether or not we'd standardize on it, or, I think one of the things that we typically try to do is if it makes everybody's life easier, go ahead and use it. We don't usually prescribe versus sort of recommend.
Yeah, I asked Chuck to bring it up just to make sure that it wasn't a no-no to do it, and that we didn't have some sort of edict that was like, you must use Bazel blah 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 to do all your releases.
Nope, there's no edicts, and in fact you'll find everything that's outside of the main KK repo is a wonderland, a tapestry of solutions. I think what I might ask though would be to document the best practices, potentially, and put it in the community repo underneath SIG cluster lifecycle.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. One other thing to mention is that it's a little bit annoying to use with Bazel because it doesn't really integrate with Bazel. So that was one of the original reasons we did not use it for previous projects. But I'm not really sure where we stand with Bazel right now. I know that we're trying to rip some of it out in Kappa.
Presumably we can contribute fixes. Like, I have my own version of this, but based on your endorsements, I'm like, I should try Go Releaser. But if there's something I would rather, like, it feels like I should just send a PR to Go Releaser rather than be like, oh, it doesn't work with Bazel, I'm going to throw it away and continue working on my own, right?
Right.
Well, it seems a little weird because Bazel is just basically like a glorified build system. So, you can shell out to do anything. So it seems like it'd be like a final shell out statement for a build process. Like if I were to call make release, it'd be like the final step of the make release process where it basically shells out to an executable. So I think documenting this all would probably be a good thing. And okay, if it works for other people, then that's great. And if it doesn't, then we'll definitely hear feedback.
Cool. I can take that as an action item to document in the community repo.
Yeah, underneath the SIG cluster lifecycle directory in the community repo.
Got it.
One of the quirks that keeps me from trying it is the CGO interaction at the moment. It doesn't officially support CGO, and we have like a dependency on libvirt, for instance, on Linux.
Oh, gotcha.
But it looks like people have made some workarounds.
What do you currently do for releases, Thomas?
A really gnarly pile of shell scripts, basically. It's homegrown, and I looked at Go Releaser as my savior, and then I saw the CGO, and I was like, oh. So I still may try it, actually, but right now we basically just do a tag and have a shell script that does the rest, generates the release notes and so forth. So, but we do have problems with, for instance, our interaction with automatically triggering new brew packages to be built. And I understand that Go Releaser has some nice automation around that.
Okay. It does. There's a bunch of Go Releaser modules, I think they are called. I don't recall. But I've used it in the past, and I liked it a lot. It made the release process smooth, clean, unified, had a nice look and feel that was easy to consume for people who are just used to GitHub.
Yeah, I will certainly give it a shot, because our release process right now is just a pile of shell script infested technical debt. So anything I can do to get rid of that would be nice.
Are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns regarding that? And once, twice, 3 times. The next topic was KubeCon North America. I wanted to get a readout real quick with regards to the sub-projects that wanted to, and hopefully you can add it to the notes, of who are the people that are interested in working on the talks. There's usually one per sub-project. I think the general take was from last meetings is that unless you actually have a release yet, we're not going to try to get a meeting venue for that until, but we will prognosticate that this is a effort that's ongoing in the intro sessions and maybe even give you some limelight to discuss. But otherwise, for the developer session, it's a little weird because you want to talk about where you're at and how people can get involved and where the binaries are and stuff like that. So what I'm hoping for from the group here is a list, because I need to file these issues with Nancy this week. So I would like to get a concrete list of people who are interested in submitting or having their names written down for giving a talk for KubeCon. Maybe because component standard and add-ons are not have a full release yet, maybe it makes sense to, and the same person's doing both, maybe it makes sense to kind of lump them together. Lee, does that jive? Or would you like to do them separately? Because it's a little weird. Because as a SIG, I have to have this long conversation with Nancy about how we're structured, and that we have many talks versus some other SIGs which only have a couple.
I figured the add-ons thing would just be a demo as a subset of what we talk about during the KubeADM conversations. Sorry, let me turn my video here. And then, so we don't need a huge section or session for add-ons. I just figured, this is a feature we want to get in, and there's some anticipated things there. So unless we want to have a contributor session for that, I don't think we need something. The component config thing is an effort where we really just need to be doubling down. So that should have its own session.
Other people's thoughts? What do you say, Justin?
I do think that component config is something that is super important. I think what exactly would the talk be like? In the past, sometimes it's been a talk, sometimes it's been more of a developer birds of a feather type session. Where are we sort of leaning? Because I think that sort of influences where
I think something that would take a marginal step forward from what Lucas did in China. He has a talk that I can link.
But it's a talk rather than a discussion.
He does. Yeah, that's a good question. Is that more productive as kind of a Q&A session with some structured content?
Because the other thing is, if it's more discussions, then we could have one room, which might make Nancy happier, with, for example, just to pick component standard, add-ons, etcd manager, all sort of gather in there and pick your sub-circle. Rather than saying we need n rooms. We can always ask for n rooms and then settle for n over 2 rooms.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't exactly know how. Usually the developer track is not necessarily a BOF. So a lot of the BOF stockpile efforts are during the contributor summit versus during the main conference. Let me think about component standard and get back to you on that one. I know that Vince has been very prolific on Cluster API, and it makes sense for him, and he's been asking for a while for him to give a talk on Cluster API. I don't know if usually we like to have 2 representatives where possible from different companies to give talks, just so we want to be as open and transparent as possible to make sure that we don't have a vendor-specific venue to talk about these things. Should I solicit the Cluster API group, or is there someone on this call who's also interested that doesn't work for VMware to talk about Cluster API related things? It has been active.
So Tim, I've added it in the notes, but Ashish had volunteered from the Cluster API community as well previously.
Yes, I recall that. We should add that here.
I wanted to ask Lee, what is your plan in terms of mentioning add-ons during the Kubedium talk?
So enhancements freezes today, and I don't have the ket pub for the Kubedium integration with the add-on installer library. I did publish a PR 2 weeks ago, just showing how that could be used, but yeah, it hasn't received any traffic or feedback. I'm not sure if like that might be a blocker for the 116 cycle.
Are we, is it, I don't think I'm on the assignee list. You want to / assign me and Lumir?
Yeah.
Yes, I just worry that depending on what we decide about this particular area of sequence lifecycle, I worry that we maybe should not mention mechanics that are still not approved in the public. Maybe we can present some options during the Kubedium talk with regards to add-ons, but we should not promote the mechanics to the users.
At least not till we've vetted it.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, do we not normally talk about alpha features?
We talk about them in the context of how to enable them sometimes, but most of the time when we go do deep dives, we don't usually prognosticate alpha features unless they're VIP high-profile stuff. Like HA is a good example. It's been asked for so many times. The problem, I think, with and users can kick the tires, but there's no guarantees. I think we can do a similar thing for add-ons. We just have to make sure, like, we prognosticate that, you know, there isn't. Is there an actual release yet, though?
No, there's a POC, right? That just shows that it works. But yeah, no release and no existing integration in Kubedium. So
why don't we talk about this during Kubedium office hours tomorrow? Can you show up there?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Fabrizio promised that he wants to take a deeper look at this, so we can discuss it. I personally think that maybe we can mention some options in front of the public, but I don't want the Kubedium basically session to turn into a bike shed where, you know, users propose different solutions to us.
Yeah, after hearing all of this, I think we should just rip the atoms portion out of the notes here, or just soft deprecate it.
Well, deprecate, but it's we can also sort of, it's a long way away, right? And so we can see where we are then, and like what features have made it and which ones have not.
I'm just going to. I'm officially going to put the stance on that. I'm going to talk with Antoine about KubeSpray. They've not been showing up to give readouts here. I don't know if any other KubeSpray folks are on the call. I don't see Chad either. So I want to, you know, you got to be part of the SIG and work within the SIG if you want me to to help do all the TPS reports for you. All right. Everything else seems legit. I don't think etcd ADM actually has a release yet, but we'll talk about that during the intro session. I do plan to submit an intro session. I'll probably be the giver of the intro session. I'm going to talk with Lucas to see if he's going to be able to attend or not. And if he wants to help give that, maybe it's possible that Justin, Lucas, and myself can do the triumvirate of the intro session. Right. If there are any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns, please add them to the notes or add them there. And what I'll do is probably by the end of this week, I'll send out an email to Nancy and start to get those things rolling. Lubomir, you're next.
So we got some complaints from Slack from people that some folks are subscribed to our sequence lifecycle main mailing list. We actually only have one nowadays. And basically I'm proposing that we create a separate one. Back in the day, we used to have sequence lifecycle dash failing tests or something like that. And I'm proposing that we create a new one, because apparently people that are currently subscribed to the main mailing list are getting a lot of spam because our kubeadm tests are unfortunately a bit flaky. So what do people think about this new list?
Well, how many people are complaining is the first question.
I got a single person from Linode.
So I get, like, in case you're wondering, I get lots of complaint emails. Every time I send a meeting update, I literally get like about 10 to 20 different complaint emails. Please remove me from this list. So I think it's not a lot of traffic. Let me open a separate window that's separate private. Take a look here to see how many emails have we gotten in the last like month or so.
I have a suggestion. Is it possible to have is there a rule? Is there some way to tell them apart and to suggest that you can filter them based on X?
Yeah, you can filter them. You definitely can.
I think the Google Groups way of filtering is to apply plus and some topic after apply plus with some topic after the email. The email part before the @ sign.
There's a million ways to filter. Like, you can filter from who's the sender and everything else. I think this particular one, like, it's not a lot of spam. Maybe once a week. Sometimes it gets modest volume, but it's not a terrible amount of spam. Like, I think the highest count day that I see is about 4 emails.
Yes. With plans of the future, once we get all the cluster API testing in place, do you think that with the amount of tests we are going to perform, do you think it's still a good idea to create a separate list just in case?
Well, I think one thing that's good, there's this trade-off that you'd have to weigh, is like spam versus broad visibility, right? And if you have a separate list and it's outside of the normal purview, as people rotate in and out, they will invariably, communication will be lost, and they won't necessarily know that this being spammed to the separate list, or that they should subscribe to that list, right? A lot of people don't even know that they should subscribe to lists today, right, as new contributors. They view Slack as the de facto way people communicate. So what I'm worried about there is information loss. I would say if it becomes a real issue, like if you got like 20, 30 people complaining about it, I think we can entertain the idea. But I think for the time being, people can always set up a filter and just filter it away, as Justin mentioned.
Okay, sounds good.
Are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns there? Once, twice, 3 times. All right, I didn't put it in the meeting notes, but we should do the sub-project updates. So I'm going to copy stuff from below and hopefully put it up here while Lubomir's typing. I can find him. Grumble. I sometimes hate this stuff. There you go. Cluster API. Does someone want to give an update there?
Sure. So we have been continuing to work on Alpha 2. There's been a variety of pull requests across the various repositories. I don't have a breakdown of specific details, but we are continuing to make progress. And we're going to be starting on a conversion tool to be able to convert from V1 Alpha 1 to V1 Alpha 2 data types. It will be most likely per provider, given that each provider is different in Alpha 1. But hopefully we can reuse some of that code across the different implementations. We've also had some new releases for the AWS provider and the vSphere providers, as well as Azure, to bring in bug fixes, add more stability. So we can put links in. I'll go do that after I finish talking. Anything you want to add, Jason?
Nope, I think you got it.
All right, if you could update the meeting notes, I was trying to do two things at once. That would be helpful for those who do the play at home game. Next up is KubeADM, Lubomir or Fabrizio.
I can give the update. So we worked this week to get a feature for 1.16 approved, cap and enhancement issue. There is already a POC for customized with kubeadmin, if someone want to take a look. And also we had a bug in file discovery for kubeadmin join that was fixed and cherry-picked in the last release. In 1.15 and 1.14, and the PR are in merge queue. That's it.
Was someone else going to say something? Bueller. Next up, Thomas, Minikube.
Sure. Things are slow since most people are out on vacation. But we have a V1.3 release this week. Lots of component updates like Docker and Kubernetes and Cryo and things like that. But otherwise, the big thing is more robust Hyper-V and the new docs website. So, that's all.
So can you tell us more about your new docs website? And because there's a bunch of versionitis problems people are having with the doc book.
Yes.
What was the choice that you made?
So we are we're using Hugo with the Doxy theme. It is basically a Netlify site, very similar to how Kind and other sub-projects have done their deployment for sub-project documentation. Right now, it is the documentation will just reflect the version at head, but we do have the capability of swapping between versions.
I am not intimately familiar, Jason, with the issues other than I get spam emails with regards to the cluster API docs. Is this helpful? Not helpful?
The big challenge that we're running into right now is just trying to align the Netlify config and the per branch config for cluster API for enabling the per branch docs.
Mm-hmm.
So some of that is proving to be a little bit tricky, but it's mostly tricky on my end because I don't have access to all the information. I rely on other folks to tell me the config and modify the config inside of Netlify. So if you do come across, if you do start doing the per branch documentation, I'd definitely be interested in seeing how you overcome some of those issues. Especially, like the big issue that we have right now is mostly that our branch names don't necessarily align with what we want the documentation URLs to be.
What are your branch names like that you're trying to generate documentation for then?
So right now the branch names are based on releases, but we really right now the documentation that we have is based on API version. So we need to be able to publish the docs based on API version right now, and that may or may not align with a particular release version number.
Yeah, we should probably rectify that. We need to have the coming to Jesus moment with regards to version naming schema.
Well,
Well, the
we
other
don't
thing
need to.
too is
We don't need to have bike shed here on this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
well-
I was just going to say, I do think we should have the documentation per version, like release version, not per API version. But we can talk about that separately.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions for Minikube? It sounds like everyone's moving towards the same pattern. Add-ons. Lee or Justin?
Yeah, so all I had for the add-on section here was just the mentioned proof of concept from the Kubidium bit. Feel free to take a look. It's very small, but it does add a new, it adds an API type to the config. So, and then with the component, or sorry, Justin, did you have anything? I missed last week's meeting because I'm just back from vacation.
Yeah, we actually had a pretty short meeting last week because lots of people were out. So there's nothing really, no real collective progress. So I'm going to look at your PR.
Cool.
Or POC.
Yeah. Criticism welcome. So the next, moving on to component config and component standard. This one's actually quite interesting. Justin wrote a KEP about basically making it possible to know whether or not a field was actually provided as an intent from whatever system created the config. And this gets into a bunch of really ugly API machinery and Go UX stuff. The API machinery problems have a lot to do with having an internal type that easily represents the values, because defaulting is often part of the same process of creating an object. And we don't have great merge semantics or merge code generation. In general, this is just a really interesting interesting discussion. So Justin's proposal is to use pointer fields for everything. And that means, it's a trade-off in usability and might be a little bit of a gnarly find and replace. But it certainly is a way to do things that will work. And it seems like we've got some good kind of moving consensus on this at the moment. So we came up with some other weird ideas that also don't really feel great. So.
Yeah. It's the least hated option, is the way I like to say it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're not even sure we're not even sure of that, and we're going to do I think we agreed to do like a prototype for a kube scheduler just to see how much we hate it.
Yeah. That's a good way of viewing it. I highly approve.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you've never worked with like the flag sets and with config, like you get into some really hairy problems here. So if you're curious, please take a look and comment and ask questions, because we have a lot of assumptions here that need to be fleshed out. So
I'm definitely interested, and I'll take a look through the KEP, hopefully this week. So TLDR, if you want me to look at something, just as a general rule of thumb, the sheer amount of spam I get from GitHub is incomprehensible. I think as a general pattern, if you want other people to look at it, just assign yourself or assign another person to take a look at it. Next up, cops.
Yep. So I think what's interesting for this group is that we have been criticized in the COP stand for the past for not having absolute clarity on when releases are coming. And what we did last time was, in our last office hours, is we basically went through all the releases we have on deck and basically agreed that they could go out in the next 2 weeks, like our inter-meeting cadence, and did a collective call for blockers and things like that, so that we made sure that no one was aware of any blocking issues. So hopefully everyone in the COPS community sort of has agreed to, or at least tacitly agreed to, and knows or can see what is coming, at least at a 2-week cadence. And the list is scary. That's it.
Are there any questions for Justin? Once, twice, 3 times. Next up, as we voted a while ago to create the image builder, we have started to collect the image building utilities into the first process that Moshe and I kind of agreed upon was first collect them all into a single repository. And then 2, start to try to reduce the state space. So right now we're currently in collection mode. We have the config ADM builder that Moshe had created, and we also have there are many versions of the cluster API Packer/Ansible scripts. This one that's currently in the repository is the one from CapV, which actually was a modified version of CapA. I don't know how we want to do this within the larger repositories, and maybe we'll do that once this particular repository becomes a little bit more mature and has release semantics around it. But ideally, I'd like to reduce them, Highlander them, as I like to say. So that way we can have well-defined release semantics from the image builder repository and not have like 12 different image building tools for different incantations of cap star providers. And we need help. We're looking for people who want to work on this. My bandwidth is a little bit limited on this effort. I've been trying to collect folks to get more people or more eyes on this effort. So if you are interested, please reach out, and we would, more the merrier. Last up is etcd-ADM. Daniel?
Hi. We've got a couple of PRs. One to add a kind of abstraction for the init system, there's some talk in the PR about whether that might be useful for other sub projects. It seems like I think kubeadm needs something like this, and definitely etcd-ADM, maybe others as well. So maybe there's room to, I'm not sure where at the moment, but maybe there's some place where this could live eventually. There's another PR for adding some more tuning, like disk priority, IO priority to the etcd system B service, and that's adding some flags. So I think one of the things that we're going to try to do in the very near term is settle on a config. We'll probably be looking to component config for some ideas and so forth, but so that the flags don't need to proliferate as people are asking for sort of more knobs to tune.
Just for my own edification, you're not talking about CIS or C group IO tuning, are you? Or are you talking about something else?
I am talking. It's. I guess there are two. There's the IO priority. Sorry, I'm having trouble remembering exactly off the top of my head. There's sort of two things that I can recall. IO priority, which can be set with the IO nice command, and I think that in the docs that's all that's shown. But I think there is also something else, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think my only comment would be like avoid C group based IO limitations like the plague. They've been fraught with peril since epoch. And there's been a number of well-written papers and all the other accoutrements that are associated with it. You can get yourself into a thorny world of hurt.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns for etcd ADM?
Daniel, we discussed the upgrade semantics for cluster lifecycle as a whole, and you created a document. Are you ready to kind of share that document for wider discussion?
Sort of. I was trying to really define the problem better last week, and didn't wrap that up. I can. Is Lubomir on the call too? Because he and I, yeah, okay, he's here. We talked about it a little bit. Or Moshe, do you want to say something?
No, it's just something that I think that we should kind of tackle as a SIG, is to define a reusable upgrade semantics between whatever projects we create. So I think it's something important to discuss.
Yeah. So the issue, at least that we saw, and it was actually an issue that we saw with kubeadm, but then we thought, okay, this will also apply to something like etcd-adm, is for cluster API today, we've decided that we're not supporting in-place upgrades. So we have replace upgrades, right, where we just cycle the different let's say control plane machines, and so that precludes using the current implementation of something like kubeadm upgrade, and would also preclude using something like etcd-adm upgrade, if we were to, if and when we're going to implement that.
Oh, I see where you're going here. This is like the mantra of immutable versus mutable, and who owns what. Like the distinguishing feature that I apply to this is that cluster API is strictly immutable by definition. If you want to, you can create an operator. You could call it etcd-adm operator, or you could call it, kubeadm operator or something like that. And those operators could do a mutable infrastructure, right, in the operator style pattern. But that allows the distinction between the two of like who would own what, where, when, and how, why, and how.
I guess it's not clear how how that would work with something like kubeadm upgrade.
We've talked about this several times in the kubeadm working group about creating an operator. I think it's a matter of time. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and priorities. So I know that Fabrizio has this longstanding opinion about being able to have a declarative config, being able to rationalize that declarative config, and only an operator pattern can solve that, right? So I wish we didn't call it operator pattern, but I wish we called it something else. Go ahead, Justin.
So are you talking about an operator for kubeadm or for etcd specifically?
You could do either or both, right? Like there's no reason you couldn't do either or, right? So yeah, I'd be interested in reading the doc, or happy to have a separate conversation. I don't know if we need to have everyone here, if it's kind of still not all written down yet. But the distinction has been pretty clear, at least in my mind, and talking about it, especially in the cluster API group, as we've had many discussions about what it means to upgrade. But I think having that written down somewhere, I think would be super useful to say, like, here's the boundary lines of the tools, and here's where you use pattern A versus here's where you use pattern B.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to sort of distill the doc into, sort of defining like these, the sort of the boundary question, identifying the existing tensions. But I guess I still don't quite understand, or I guess one of the tensions that I see is that for something like kubeadm, right? kubeadm is one of its use cases. One of the goals is trying to achieve is to make it easy for someone interactively to invoke the CLI, right? So somebody has a bunch of machines, maybe they're manually running kubeadm upgrade on them, but the other use case has now become, okay, this is being maybe orchestrated by some by an operator, right? And I know, for example, that there are at least for like the AWS provider, right, for Kappa, there is the assumption that it's not going to be running commands, invoking anything on the hosts, apart from what's in the initial bootstrap script. So it makes me wonder, like, where's this mechanism for even invoking something like kubeadm upgrade? And like that's one of the tensions. The other tension, I think, is with the control plane join and kubeadm sort of handling some of its own orchestration, things that could be handled by a cluster API control plane. But then again, kubeadm also needs to support the use case where that control plane is maybe not around at all. So those sort of things. And anyway, I will. I guess we weren't sure really where to put this.
Well, I would recommend writing up a doc with your thoughts and the boundary lines of what issues you're seeing, and then maybe send it out to the list, and we can have a more informed discussion as a group, maybe during the next SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. I do agree that there are sets of problems, and they are currently for several folks, they are overlapping concerns, but I think we can disambiguate and tease them apart into a set of domain-specific problems for each tool. And I think that's a good conversation to have.
I have a quick question with regards to quote-unquote replace upgrades. I personally think that Kubernetes itself is not friendly to this type of upgrade. So I was wondering, like, what is, for instance, GKE doing when doing upgrades? Are the nodes immutable? Maybe Justin knows.
The GKE does not. The nodes are immutable. Yes, GKE does not do upgrades in place of masters or of nodes, user nodes.
So new nodes with a new version of the control plane join the cluster, and does this create a scenario where we are temporarily violating the versions queue?
No, because the versions queue policy has been designed very carefully to enable this upgrade is sort of the answer. There is a bug which I filed a number of years ago now around in a multi-master sort of an HA configuration. Everyone should be more careful to upgrade API server and then controller managers and all these things. And I don't know of anyone today that is actually doing that. So there may well be someone, but I don't know if like COPS does it wrong. I think GKE still does it wrong, I think. But we've made that more tolerable, so it's less likely to be a problem now.
There's a bunch of magic that can occur in, like, because the system is so resilient to failure, there are a bunch of ways where it's secretly failing on the second and third node, and only one is really the updated one. And eventually, as you update the others, everything comes back online. So this scenario has existed for a long time, especially in the control plane nodes. Like, here's the concrete example. You upgrade a control plane node, and for some reason, as part of the upgrade process, it does the conversion for API objects to the latest incantation of those API objects. The old control plane nodes that existed, that are still online, maybe perform a list operation, but they can't actually do the conversion because they have no idea what version it is. So as a result, they implode, right? Or they go into a crash loop, or they fail the actual calls. But because everything else in the system does retries and backoffs, this API server becomes unhealthy, the other one becomes unhealthy, then you only have one that's online, then you replace the other ones. So it's a known condition. It's not the best condition, but it's also not the worst condition. Like back in the day when everything was blowing up at regular times, that was much worse than this is. I think because we are fault tolerant, maybe to a fault, dad jokes, that we can recover from a lot of these things.
So if I join a node to the cluster, a control plane node that has a new version of a kubelet, and I have an existing node in the cluster that has a old version of API server, we might be creating a version skew problem. So how do we handle that in products?
I think what you're saying is solved by that you should always update the masters first, because you are not allowed. We have disallowed and upgrade the masters first and downgrade the nodes before a downgrade if we are, because you're not allowed to have a kubelet that is ahead of the API server.
But technically, this imposes the limitation that the masters should not run a kubelet.
I don't believe so. Can you explain?
Yeah, so like if you look at what we're doing in, say, the cluster API upgrade tool, we create a machine that's got a newer version of the kubelet running, that's got the newer version you want to roll to. So technically, for a brief period of time, you do have a newer kubelet with an older set of API servers while you're doing that upgrade.
And COPS is also like breaking the rules there, and we probably have another issue to open. Good point.
Yeah, so again, we've been breaking this kind of rule for a long time. It's not been catastrophic because of the window of time of the upgrade. If we want to be purely seamless, then there's work to be done. But I think because of the priorities of other things, it's this has been existed for a long time, right? But we've been able to get by with it for years.
I think also API server has tightened up the guidelines on that you're not supposed to both introduce and start using a new field in the core control plane in one version. You have to split it across two versions, or you should split it across two versions, which helps a ton. But things still do sneak through.
I was able to witness such type of breakage around the 113 cycle, where the new kubelet really broke the cluster.
Yeah.
But it was in a certain commit in master, it was work in progress.
Well, so we didn't release that, is what you're saying?
No, we released that, but the kubelet work was ahead of the API server work in terms of the feature that was being developed. So the PR for the kubelet was first, then the API server change. And by the time of the release, the feature was complete in both components.
So I don't know if we want, this is one of those things where we could add a long-standing issue, which is not a bad idea. And I know Justin probably has one from one of the aught versions of issues that are still around.
I have one for controllers writing newer fields. I don't have one for kubelet being upgraded because it's on the same node.
Just for our own, just to keep us honest with ourselves, maybe we should have one larger tracking issue that we keep in our long-standing issues that we walk through periodically, because at least then we can revisit it periodically. And if it becomes, if we do notice a catastrophic failure, we can reference that and try to go and fix it. But because we've kind of gotten by, it's not been a priority for a long time. Do you want to open that issue, Livimir?
For tracking the Kubernetes API server upgrades process in which repository?
At least in KK, just the meta issue that we can use to, I don't know. It's way thornier than just having a simple fix, right?
Should I name it like best practices in sequence lifecycle upgrades or something like that?
Sure, sounds good.
Okay.
We have T-minus 3 minutes. Are there any other last group topics? Going once.
Hold up, Tim. One more. Just right after this meeting, there is an overview of cluster API provider Docker, which is kind of a nice way to get involved in the cluster API group. If anybody here is interested in that, I will be kicking that off in 2 minutes or whenever this meeting ends.
Cool. Did you send a meeting invite to the mailing list?
Yeah, I did. I hope people got it. The last time I did that, it went to spam.
I got that meeting invite. So, yeah.
Cool.
I'd recommend it if you're working on Cluster API. This will probably speed up your workflow and make your life a little bit easier. Any other last questions, comments, complaints, concerns? Going once. Twice. 3 times. Sold. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great Wednesday.